Welcome to the EMEA Recruitment Podcast in partnership with Operation Smile, an international medical charity that provides life-changing surgery for children born with cleft lip and palate. To find out more about this cause, please visit our website, emearecruitment.com/operation-smile. In this episode, we're joined by Alan Panter, CFO at Fossil Group Inc. He explains how a change-oriented culture and resilience of its people helped Fossil through a transformation during the pandemic.
So hello everybody, welcome to the next episode of the EMEA Recruitment Podcast in partnership with our good friends over at Operation Smile. So as my colleague Rose has just mentioned, we're delighted to welcome Alan Panter onto the podcast today. So hopefully you can hear me okay still?
I hear you fine this morning, Paul.
Perfect. And whereabouts in the world do we find you today, Alan?
I'm in Basel, which is my sort of first half of the week location with Fossil. I like the rest of the world, also work partly from home, and I'm blessed to spend the other part of my week in Lausanne in Switzerland. So Basel and Lausanne. Nice.
So I know Switzerland, an awesome place to live, great quality of life, and we're recording this towards the end of June, so the weather is great as well at the moment. So I guess a lot of smiles on people's faces at the moment, a lot more positive feelings going around there than maybe what we've had in the last 3 years. And I guess linked into that, and because the show is in partnership with Operation Smile, I thought I'd start things off in a nice kind of easy way and just really ask you what the last thing was that made you smile, Alan.
That's a great question, Paul. I mean, I would like to say instinctively seeing people out living their lives, consuming, seeing friends and family, the sort of things that, you know, a lot of us haven't been able to do in the way we're accustomed to doing it. That's really started to be a feature of what we see. And the weather has really helped that over the last, couple of months or so, particularly here in Basel, where the weather is very nice in the summer. So a lot of smiling faces, trying to get back to, normal life, if you like. And I've also, in tandem, seen a lot of really wonderful work, quite honestly, incredible work that people are doing to support what's going on, in the Ukraine, elsewhere, either through family or personal connections or indirectly through sponsorship and others. So there's some great humans on this planet. We mustn't forget that.
No, it's a really great overview, I guess, of where we're at the moment. I know there's a lot of positive things now out of the COVID situation or coming out of it, but obviously a lot on people's minds and in the news at the moment on the whole Ukraine situation that we can't forget about that is going on. And I mean, I think that, it's obviously been a challenging time for everybody really over the last 3 years. You're trying to adapt to this new way of working, new way of living, but trying to put maybe a bit of a positive spin on it. Is there anything that you feel you've learnt over the whole COVID period that has now impacted your life for the better, would you say?
Fundamentally, I would say absolutely, Paul. I mean, I would sort of see myself, and I think leaders of organizations have to be a little bit this definition, but I see myself a bit as of a change agent. I've grown up through change, actually proactively seek it these days. It's part of what I am and what I do. And I think that if you said to me, particularly as a retailer, fundamentally a retail organization that Fossil is, if you said to me that, we would go through a period as we did where our daily, weekly, monthly sales flash, both within the region and globally, would say zero, across the board. That point of a new low, if you like, that we defined really forced us to change, and it told us as an organization, reminded me as a leader, and I guess us as humans that change is necessary to progress. We don't always need it quite in the degree that we experienced it maybe the last couple of years, but it's incredible what can be achieved. By smart people, motivated in the right way, working together. Most importantly, I think, what you can really achieve. So I think the last couple of years has reminded us what we're capable of, both in terms of complexity and also sheer volume. So we're fortunate, I think, here at Fossil that we've been on a journey transforming this business. So we were aligned across the organization in terms of, yes, and rather than yes, but, which is really a hallmark of this organization, and I think a bit of a differentiator. But we set the tone prior to the pandemic, and then when the pandemic arrived, people were change oriented, they were flexible, they were committed, and we really, I think, made the most of that opportunity to further transform the business, both as an organization and in its outcomes.
Yeah, because within that, you mentioned, a lot has been achieved, and obviously the transformation that you've been going through at Fossil. So I suppose linking those two things together, would you say that has been the biggest achievement for you and the business over that time? Going through that transformation and the progress that's been made on it.
And I think if you look at the pandemic as a sort of a long but sort of limited event, I think we can be proud as an organization and to some degree as people that we came through it and showed our true colors, our resilience, our innovation, our resilience, all those good things. I would say in terms of achievement, actually, the thing that made that feel more than bearable, actually, was some of what I call the preconditions. So transformation is obviously about thinking about the target operating model of the business, how you're going to market, what you do well, what you should drop, all of those sorts of choices. But it also achieves a lot of sort of intangibles around getting the right people on board, getting the alignment in terms of overall direction, and making sure you've got the right energy in the organization. You need people who are as I said, on board and keen to make a difference, and to some degree happy with uncertainty. Okay to navigate uncertainty. That kind of collaboration, that kind of group, that mentality, was set for us in the transformation exercise, and therefore it enabled us to be far more resilient and thoughtful and at the same time fast in the way we responded to the pandemic, I believe. So the biggest achievement is getting all those hearts and minds going in the right direction, and that's fundamentally what a transformation really is all about. Yeah,
because within that, obviously you mentioned a few things around having the right people, having a very strong culture for the business that can facilitate change and transformation, and then also I think at the start you were mentioning about the focus that's needed to get these things done, especially when there's always plenty of things that you can do in the day, but only a handful of things that really the focus is really needed on. And I suppose over the COVID period when people were working at home, I know a lot of people really felt the pressure quite a lot, because it became, especially in the early days, it was quite hard to have that focus and to make sure that people were prioritizing the right things, so they weren't overworking and under extreme amounts of pressure. So I just wondered, because you've been there, you've done it, and you've got plenty of experience leading up to COVID to fall back on. What would you say has been the key for you working well under pressure generally?
That's a great question. The maybe amusing answer is be subject to a lot of stress in the past, and you become quite accustomed to it. As I said, it's a slight whimsical response. There's an element of truth in it, which is that you become resilient if you have to deal with more uncertainty and change. And as I said before, that it has become a little bit of a skill set for me. And I've always sort of said I feel like I am, and I like to recruit people who almost instinctively put their hands up for a situation. Cast your mind back to the school or school team or whatever situation you've been in your professional life. There are people who are self-confident enough to give it a go, but at the same time aware that maybe they don't have all of the skills, and therefore if you have the combination of a bit of confidence, a bit of a track record of dealing with change, and the honesty to know that you don't know all the answers, you can achieve really an awful lot. So I would say it wasn't actually as stressful as could be painted, let's say, partly because the organization was aligned, partly because, as a management team, we've been through a lot of change and quite a bit of stress. And partly because in the end, there are more important things in life than work, whether that be, your friends, your family, their health in particular over the last couple of years. I would say more and more something that's core for a lot of people, particularly core for me, is sustainability, the next generation, the planet that we inhabit. So a little bit of perspective some situations of stress and the right attitude really help you navigate. And I like to think that we can inspire the next generation of people not to be too concerned and not to be as worried as maybe we think that they are about how difficult the world is going to be in many ways by asking them to step out, make a change, maybe not try to address the bigger picture all the time, but try to find the right bite-sized, meaningful pieces of activity and improvement they can take. And the sum of all of those parts of improvement or change make a big difference collectively. And I think that's particularly the case when you think about the environment and the change that the world is required to go through right now. There's no one single lever. There are many things that need to happen in tandem.
And what I find interesting, I mean, when I look at what you're saying here and also the views of previous guests we've had on the podcast, many of them have quite a similar approach to life, a similar approach to problem solving and dealing with situations as you do as well. But one of the things I also see people having in common is that as well as being very strong in the area of prioritizing their time, having focus and making sure the right things get done, they also do put a good amount of time aside outside of work to do things they enjoy, because then that helps them outside of work, but also within work as well, to keep the energy going. And I didn't think really we could have the discussion with you today without mentioning some of the things you do outside of work, because they're quite unusual, I would say, compared to previous guests we've had on there, at least anyway. So obviously a certified snowboard instructor, which is pretty cool. I guess being in Switzerland, it's quite aligned, but I know you're into cycling and triathlons. So, I guess where does that come from? This kind of drive and commitment and passion to these kinds of things, because they are certainly, the snowboard instructing is quite unusual. I can't imagine there's that many CFOs who have that certification outside of work as well.
But you painted a very interesting picture. I've just actually hit 50 years old this year, Paul. So I don't do as much of those things in the depth that I once did, but all of those things are of interest to me. I signed up this summer actually for a shorter version of a triathlon for the first time in a few years. So I'm still doing all of those things that you mentioned. I do them slightly less degree, maybe with less intensity than I did when I was a 30-year-old or so. I think the key to all of that is, you said it yourself, which is balance kind of is important, to get perspective on work. A lot of the things I do, whether it's swimming or running or snowboarding, gives me time to think as much as it gives me the pleasure of the activity itself. It often allows me to join the dots in a way that I don't if I'm consciously trying to focus on a challenge or maybe a work topic. So, it gives me pleasure, but it also gives me a sort of natural filtering and dot joining activity cerebrally, if that makes sense. But probably the thing that drives me more than anything is variety. I said I like change several times. I genuinely like to explore different things, good and bad. I fail as much as I think I succeed in various areas. I recently took up downhill mountain biking, and I'm far from other than a debutant, as the French would say. So I just like to appreciate the chance I have to take as many of those chances and to meet engaging and interesting and more often than not, far more talented people than I. But it's the variety and that stimulates me, and the balance that helps me probably in my professional life, actually.
No, I think as well as that, I mean, you can almost tell listening to your answers and the tone that you're answering them in that there's a passion and an enjoyment there behind what you're doing outside of work. And I thought I'd almost seamlessly link that to your finance career, because I mean, I know on LinkedIn, in one of the first things you say about yourself on your LinkedIn profile is that you have a passion for finance and an appetite for life. And we sort of, discussed a bit about your appetite for life, but the passion for finance, I mean, where does that come from, and what really kind of drove you into the finance career?
Gosh, that is a good question. It's hard to know the exact answer. It's a number of influences over a period of time. I remember distinctly when I was at university wanting to go into business, let's put it that way, and to kind of not just go into it in a technical sort of, pure finance way, but go into maybe a creative way. Now, it's taken me a long time to get to that creative point where I have more than what I'll call the sort of the deep technical skills as part of my responsibilities. I have a lot more operational, even sort of HR and organization design influence maybe than I would have done when I was younger. I mentioned sustainability is one of the big topics I'm trying to help Fossil as an organization drive forward. But it came from a desire to understand business, to find solutions, to kind of create answers. But I started in the world of becoming a chartered accountant as my primary objective, working for a great, incredible organization and people at Price Waterhouse. And that journey just really created what was a voyage of discovery of all of the functional, so topical areas, whether it's accounting or FP&A, M&A, treasury, cash forecasting, due diligence, you name it, all of the typical stuff. But that kind of that blend of skills really took me to understanding much better how organizations run, and they run through people and culture typically. So it's great to have, I think, the functional, finance science to always fall back on. I mean, that's your core, that's your foundational layer. But as you go across businesses, you learn an awful lot about people, how to work with people, how to be effective with, ideally with people rather than sort of round or through them. And then that takes you to sort of organization, what makes organizations effective and so on. So, I've been very lucky that I've had great mentors, great coaches, and so on to help me on that journey. But I think it was the desire to sort of go into business and make a difference rather than necessarily go into finance and become a finance, guy. That was my original thought. But as I said, you're taking me back too many years to mention that.
So now we've almost taken you back through the career. I thought maybe to ask a question more relevant to the current day, really. I mean, because you obviously talked a bit about how we got into finance, what drove you into that discipline, and some of the great people that you've been surrounded by over this time. But I thought, obviously, being in the CFO role at Fossil is a great business, a great position, wonderful country to be based in. So I just thought I'd ask you what it feels like now to be the CFO at Fossil.
The instinctive answer is that a function of Fossil's culture, we're extremely kind of collaborative, value-oriented, mission, purpose-driven kind of organization. So we recruit people for whom the bigger picture and doing the right thing and having fun is important. The instinctive answer is it's easy. Really, it's easy doing my job in the sense that I have skilled professionals doing all of the key attributes, particularly in finance, but elsewhere. But I have great sort of like minds, international experience, openness to change. I mentioned a few times, and quite a lot of fun on top. Fossil is a very young. In reality, at its heart, across the whole organization, it's a young sales and marketing, brand, product-focused organization. So it's quite youthful. It's easy to sort of take advantage, if you like, and leverage all of that energy that gets created. So it's an easy place to work and do my job when I think about the culture, the age group of the people, and as I said, having a really strong kind of functional team across my responsibilities makes my job easy and a pleasure. But there's probably more to it than that you would like me to elaborate on, I'm guessing.
No, I mean, it's one of those things that, it's always interesting to hear the answers to this because, obviously, people build up a lot of learning and development through their careers. And then when you get the chance to look back from your current role, it's always interesting to hear what people say. And I think, your answer to this, as well as within some of your previous answers, there's a lot around being surrounded by great people and having great people around you, which I think you mentioned earlier, the organizations run through people and you like people who are proactive and want to give things a go. And if you find people like that, then, using your word, probably it does make your life easy because you've got great people around you who can help, and it makes the day job enjoyable, But I suppose one of the obvious things to state is that this getting these great people around you and building that culture, easy to say, but harder to do, you know. So I thought clearly we couldn't really have a podcast discussion on the recruitment podcast without asking you about recruitment. So and this leads me quite nicely into that. I mean, so you've obviously, you know, stated a few times about how important it is to have great people around you. But I mean, how over the years have you done that? You know, if you look at the recruitment processes you've been involved in, are there any particular ways that you think it's important to make a process really efficient and effective?
Definitely, because I couldn't agree more with you that I would say, Paul, you can be brilliant, right? But if you aren't efficient and effective in the way that you manage people, then your brilliance is lost, right? In terms of execution, and organizations are about delivery and often delivery at speed. So, you know, it's really important that you know, across all levels, but particularly, you know, your direct reports, which is largely what, you know, you tend to end up recruiting for. That group of direct reports have to be, you know, have to fit your expectations, whatever they are. So I have two things that I always do. One is I get the most clarity I can on the top 3, sometimes the top 5, you know, experiential and technical sort of hard skills components. And they tend to be a bit of a prerequisite. And I hope most of those are confirmed through the early stages of the interviews, but they still need a little bit of stress testing in the interview. But assuming that is overcome, I would say that the most important thing for me is to get into, you know, a bit the mind of the person who I'm recruiting, and that can often take quite a long time. I'm probably known a little bit for interviewing people at length. I nearly always take or ask for maybe an hour and a half in an interview rather than an hour, because I find with the beginning and the end of an interview, it's really hard to get to the moment where you say, tell me more about that example. What was it like? How did you respond? What did you bring with you that helped you answer that question and make that project or that initiative a success? Getting to that moment where you're able to understand how that person responds, how they think, where they draw their knowledge and how they collaborate. Getting to that moment of practicality is really my second sort of targeted interview. And it can take quite a while to peel back the layer, the covers, you know, the formality of the interview, to get to that moment where you're visualizing working alongside this individual. And I find when that has been successful, the conversation moves from being an interview to being a conversation. How would you go about that? Tell me a bit more about that. It's interesting how you thought about that, you know, and it becomes really a sort of a super interesting two-way dialogue rather than a list of questions with answers, you know, of differing quality, let's say. So that's really my objective, is to get to what will it be like to work with this individual? How will they think and how will we collaborate when we get there?
Hi everybody, it's Paul Thomas here. I hope that you're well and you're enjoying the podcast so far. Thank you once again for your continued support listening to the podcast. I just wanted to break into the recording to talk to you about a really exciting partnership that EMEA Recruitment has along with Operation Smile. And as founder of EMEA Recruitment, it's an honour and a privilege to announce this partnership. Personally, I was born with a cleft lip and palate, so the mission of Operation Smile is something that I have a strong personal connection with. It's not an understatement to say that the dentists and surgeons that helped me were life changers. It's not only about the actual operations that take place, the support and care post and pre-operation are beyond value, and from personal experience I can only say that I'd not be the confident, happy person I am today without this support. I want to help children experience the support and care and skill that I experienced on my journey, and hope that we can do this along with Operation Smile. Every 3 minutes, a child is born with a cleft lip or cleft palate, and the mission of Operation Smile is to provide help and support to these children through providing 6,000 medical volunteers across 80 countries who are dedicated to help these children with facial conditions, most commonly cleft lip and cleft palate. More than 200,000 children are born with a cleft every year, and they are often unable to speak, eat, socialise or even smile. However, it can take as little as 45 minutes and cost just €180 or 182 francs for Operation Smile to provide a child with life-changing surgery. Now, in partnership with Operation Smile, EMEA Recruitment is raising valuable funds and aiming to create 100 new smiles to support the organisation to provide free surgeries for children and young adults all over the world. Please help us by donating through the link in the bio, or get in touch to see how your company can help get involved too. For the moment, I'll leave you to carry on listening to the rest of the podcast, but if there's anything I can do in terms of answering any questions or finding out how you can help and support EMEA Recruitment and Operation Smile, then please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of the podcast.
I mean, given that, I mean, I know a big challenge that a lot of companies and individuals had during the COVID period related to recruitment was that it's a lot harder to build that relationship with someone on a video interview. You mentioned really having an hour and a half with someone in person, really getting to know what is driving the person, what decisions they've made, and uncovering who the person really is. You can do that on a video call, but it's a lot more challenging to do it. So, I mean, did you still continue to have the same processes in place through the COVID period when you largely couldn't meet people in person?
I think you sort of have to fall back on what that's worked well in the past. So the philosophy, the process itself didn't change. You're absolutely right. You know better than anyone else, Paul, that you lose some intangibles in a conversation through Zoom. There's no doubt about that. I do think that if you ask the right questions and you listen well and you probe far enough, you can get pretty close. But I think that there's nothing quite like the informal moments around and between sort of interviews that give you just that little bit of insight to that person. The one-off remarks and the way they hold themselves, the way they interact with other people, often in the corridor or in the lift or in the reception, tells you an awful lot about what it's going to be like with that person as your representative, particularly in the case where they're reporting to you or you've recruited them directly. They're your brand effectively. So I would say it's hard to say that the process adapted, other than maybe we had one or two more follow-up probing discussions to test things that we thought we knew, but that we would have known better in person, if you like. You come back to similar objectives, which is trying to understand how this person will operate, how they will work, how they'll integrate with your team, your direct team, and also other people in the organization, because that's super important. And also what it will be like to work with them, one-on-one or in a group, how they will collaborate. So the process, I think, is the same, but the execution is a little bit harder and maybe a little bit different.
And I think it's interesting because, I mean, if you look at your LinkedIn profile again, I'm coming back to that because I noticed that there's over 20 recommendations on your LinkedIn profile, and largely from people who've worked with you where you've been their manager, really singing your praises as a great manager and how you've coached and mentored them. You've been happy to get involved in the detail of things when needed, as well as offering the higher level strategic point of view on matters as well. And I thought, obviously earlier on you mentioned a bit about mentoring, because you've had some advice over the years from certain individuals who've helped move your career in the right direction. You're obviously trying to pass that on to your team and other people now in mentoring. And I didn't know, is there any origin for where your management style kind of comes from? Is it something that you always wanted to be this type of manager, so you worked really hard to become that manager and have that style, or is it something that just has come naturally to you from your bloodline, maybe?
I mean, again, it's a great question, Paul. I think there are a couple of elements that I would draw on in answering that. The first one is probably, PW was Price Waterhouse, where I started work, was known for having a very strong coaching culture. So, if I split organizations into what I call kind of dictatorial and highly collaborative on the two opposite ends of the spectrum, Price Waterhouse was very, very collaborative, very open, but it was a piece of work, a piece of coaching that was developed, if you like. So it wouldn't be, I'm going to tell you what to do because this is my view of the world. It would be, we have an objective, we need to go do this thing. How would we go and do that together? What does your experience bring? What does mine bring? And how do we refine that into an agreement where we say, let's do that thing and then go from there. Now, I think there's, in an organization, there's a time and a place for both. There are times, particularly, in crisis, where you need clear decision making, clear authority, and people want to be led. So there's no doubt that these things are not mutually exclusive. But I think that from a kind of commercial and organizational perspective, times are a little bit less where individuals have one brilliant idea, they know all of the parts of it from beginning through middle to the end of the execution, and they can tell you all of the answers. I think those times were behind us more than they're in front of us. And so the art to navigating a complex world is to do what you want to do, which is recruit smart people to bring the experience and intelligence to the subject that you are responsible for and let them do their work. So I see my role as coaching the ingredients and the alignment and the collaboration and the teamwork ultimately out of that group of people. And then when it comes down to it, clearly a decision needs to be made, and that should maybe in this case be mine. But I think it's about a philosophy that says, the sum of the parts is greater. And if I think about, how I try to work with people, I try to live that, I try to sort of not be that sort of dictator in the meeting. I try not to close down conversations. I try to open them up. I try to join them up. And I think that's helped me navigate organizations. But I would say it took me a long time to realize that as I wanted to evolve to become a leader, that I didn't need to know all the answers. That actually it was going to be impossible to know all the answers. But as a young male, maybe, but professional, I think my mold was, I'm going to need to know everything to be able to lead bigger and bigger teams. And actually the opposite's true. You need to have key areas, clear areas where, you can add that piece of insight, and breadth helps that. Experience really helps that. But I think the productivity, the end goal typically comes from bringing the best out of those teams of people.
No, again, interesting, because I know the next question I had for you was aligned to how you tend to structure your day. But actually, I think a better question is really, I know when people, let's say, the mid-level of their career, and they hear interviews with CFOs and leaders in finance, people seem to be doing so much. You've got so many things to do on a daily basis, both inside and outside work. I mean, we've not spoken about the fact that you've got a young family as well, and you just, I know that sometimes we get feedback saying, well, how do these guys do this? There's only so many hours in the day. How is it possible for people to achieve so much in the same amount of time that I can't get, one or two things done? I'm stuck in one project and I can't get away from. So I was just wondering if you have a typical way that you try to sort of schedule your day, if there's certain times of the day that you put to one side to do one certain thing, and if you're quite good at that side of prioritizing and focusing, really.
That's an interesting topic. I think I'm probably an awful person to work for, Paul, because I'm very unstructured. Again, it's something that I've at times striven for in my life, to be more structured, more organized, more predictable for my team. And actually, I realized that causes me so much stress and so much lack of productivity that I need to just be my natural self. And my natural self is a little bit unstructured, and I'm conscious of that fact, and I try to make that not difficult for the people I work with. But I think part of the key is your life's journey, which is knowing yourself, knowing when you work well. There are times when you can put yourself under stress, and you can work really long hours, and you can keep that up for a period of time. A project, I did an IPO many years ago, and I've done a lot of kind of intense project work, and you can do that, but you can't do it indefinitely from project to project to project. I and most other humans can't do that. So I think you have to know where your intensity is, what your energy levels are like, and during the course of the day, that can ebb and flow as well. You get your energy, from different places. So my day tends to be quite fluid. comparing one to another, and even within the day. So I won't force a topic where I know I want to complete a piece of work. I've scheduled to do a piece of work and to complete the thinking, for example. If it's not coming, I don't force it. I move on very quickly to the next thing, because I might feel more energy in those areas on that particular day. I certainly won't come up with the right or the best answer to the topic I had in mind if I force myself. So I tend to follow my body in a strange way. I follow my understand and try to follow where my energy levels are taking me. And what I have to make sure I do is, therefore, I don't leave things to the last minute, because if I have to do something before the deadline and my energy's not there, I for sure won't get the right answer. But as long as I can adapt, I will do that. So I'd love you to ask my team that question. I like to think that part of it is that I facilitate them. My job is to make them effective. I can be ineffective as long as they are all effective. So I try very hard to give them the space. I try them to take decisions. That's what we pay them for. That's what we recruit them. That's what we train them for, to be able to take decisions. They don't need me all of the time. The opposite's true. And the more they feel that, the more they want to do it, the more they like it. It adds to their quality of work. And of course, it allows me to focus on what I think are the bigger things, and not be involved in micromanagement, which is one of my great bugbears, I would say, micromanagement.
Now, you mentioned there a bit about taking decisions and giving responsibility to people, and obviously frees up your time to make bigger decisions on important projects. And I think one of the things I was going to ask you about today is something that impacts all of really what we've been talking about in terms of your day job and discipline, and that's the impact of BI and data, because that does have an impact on decision making. Hopefully, it has a positive impact on time and time management and people management. But obviously, there's still a bit of unknown about it all at the moment. So I thought I'd just ask you really how you feel BI and data and its impact is going to change the future of finance from your point of view.
Gosh, interesting. I think it's a really difficult question in some senses, easy in others, Paul. What I mean by that is there are clearly organizations, we know them all, well-resourced, scaled, and they are making differentiating investments in technology, in data scientists, and really making the core of their organization about not just data, but predictions based on data, and determining the future, if you like, from the way that they utilize that data, or at least having a good chance of understanding what the future is going to be like. So I think there's a group of organizations that are clearly way out ahead in those areas, and they are probably in the AI and heavy tech space that we all know and love. I think it's much more challenging for mid-sized organizations, and Fossil's been a very successful organization, but ultimately it's a mid-sized organization. So making those decisions, those investment decisions, to build that kind of capability, certainly it's not an overnight activity. It's got to be a belief and a build over time. And I would say that's probably what we as Fossil are doing. And I would say, candidly, sometimes I think we should be doing more, me as an individual, us as a team, us as a business, doing more in this space. But I think where I take the comfort is from, as a finance function, but as a leader of a business, the first port of call in every situation should be, what does the data tell us, or what does the historic data potentially tell us about the future? Because one is not a determinant of the other. So we try to kind of start with data, start with trend, external data. I've long been a believer in bringing together sort of external sources, typically macroeconomic and in many cases geographical and other sort of similar bits of data. So I think there's that group of data, which is pretty obvious. I think it's quite hard when you then think about the data we're surrounded by. Teams, I know my own team struggles with the ability to integrate data across different technology platforms, particularly in our e-commerce business. And so there's an objective to be more coherent in gathering that data and then doing something meaningful with it. I think we have to be really careful that doesn't become an end in its own, right? Because you can and to some degree have to invest quite a lot of time, energy, effort in getting data to integrate. The question is, what are you using that data for? And nearly everything starts with a hypothesis. So I've got to, if I know what I'm trying to test as a business objective, I can then make that route navigation through the data easier. It's less overwhelming in terms of where am I going to go. I'm not just waiting for information somehow to come to me magically. It's got to be about hypothesis and then test. And I think that helps smaller organizations understand a little bit what it is they're trying to do in the data and analytics area. At least that's my sort of personal experience of it.
Linked into what we've been talking about in the discussion so far, I mean, you're rightly proud of what Fossil have achieved, a great culture, great people, a great management styles, getting the most out of people. But obviously, with the impact of BI and data and it being more data-led, maybe roles coming in the future, FP&A, for example, these roles will change. You mentioned companies that are leading the way in this area. Not surprisingly, Microsoft, for example. I mean, they do the majority of their planning and forecasting is now done using BI and data. So it means their FP&A folk are much more now their business partners, much more than into the figures. So it will change the personality of profiles of people. But do you worry that the BI and data mindset might change the way we evaluate people, because it would be quite easy for certain roles to look at a dashboard to see if someone's doing well rather than to sit with somebody and have a chat with them. Is it ever something you think about on that side?
Not quite in that way. What I would say, Paul, probably is I just think it takes you down specialization further, right? So, there's always, I guess, across all functions, but in finance, there's clearly an analytical muscle that is either inherent or gets built or both. And that kind of structures our way through the data into the conclusions and all that good stuff. But then very, very clearly as well, and I would say of much more value ultimately, is how you articulate that hypothesis, conclusion, series of options, and then the planning and execution route from that, how you articulate that to other people. Because, typically those people are not maybe as analytical in their original muscle. And so it comes a little bit back to what I was saying before, you can be brilliant from a data and analysis or inspiration side, but if you can't convey that message in a clear way, and you can't bring people on board, then good for you, right? You can't move the organization forward, and its culture is playing into that as well. So I think what I would envisage, and the way I think about data and analytics, is a little bit the way I think about IT projects, which is that the business has either a project in the IT world or a hypothesis in the kind of commercial world, and it needs to go to people who can translate that hypothesis into something you can go test. So in the world of IT projects, that would kind of be the business analyst that says, the business is articulating its need like this. We think that could look like this in software and technology terms. In data and analytics terms, the business has a hypothesis that customers are doing X, Y, or Z. I need to go test that, but how would I structure the data? Where would the data come from? Where is the data of good quality and integrity? And the middleman, if you like, my sort of business analyst comparison, goes and articulates that to the data scientists, and they go get the data. So you've got these two layers of very hard data and analysis skills, and then you've still got these very important softer EQ-based skills that allow you to articulate the need in a very detailed way, but also translate it back to the business in a way that they can digest. And that is probably how we think about it, particularly because you've got a finite number of resources you've got to use really well. So there's the data and analytics capability, and then there's the interface with the rest of the business that can take the hypothesis and test it and report back, or something of that nature. So that's a bit how we think about it. I certainly think about it, but I would suggest it probably pushes people a bit down those two specialisms, that communication and EQ the ability to take that data and do something meaningful with it is separate from the high level of integrity and analysis itself as a skill.
No, I thought obviously we're talking a bit about the future of finance, and I thought I'd try to bring it back to your own personal journey as our last question on the show. I know we started off with quite a light-hearted question around Operation Smile, so I thought I'd ask this last one. And to be honest, it's the first time I've asked this question on the podcast, but it's linked to your activities outside of work. I mean, given that you're, as I say, into snowboarding, triathlon, cycling, and doing some other new things as well at the moment. So I thought I'd ask you really if there's one experience or activity that you have on your bucket list that is the next one up for you, really.
Gosh, there are probably 50 things on the bucket list, because the person who defines himself as liking variety and change probably should have a long list, right? But the one that's right at the top, and interestingly, I asked this question a lot of my team to stimulate discussion, is where would they want to go, if they had free choice in the world? And the place that always comes up is Japan. And I think for me, but on reflection generally, it's one of those places in the world that truly feels like there will be a cultural impact and difference. When you arrive in Tokyo, people always say at the railway station, it kind of hits you in the face. You don't speak the language. It's somewhere that's clearly, intensely populated, highly urban, exciting, energetic. But I think it's also got an amazing blend of that to Japanese history and heritage and culture. There's the sort of artistic, and I'm influenced by art and calligraphy and those sorts of things. So there's that kind of side. There's food, nature. There's amazing, I'm told, skiing conditions, some of the best, driest, least humid snow and conditions anywhere in the world. So people rave about skiing and snowboarding in Japan. You name it, bullet trains, could go on. So I think the variety of the experience is the bit that excites me most about Japan. And for the third year running, I have tickets to go to Japan next year. I'm very, very fortunate to say I'm going to try and do this one early with my kids while they can experience it. But it'll be third time lucky. So let's hope that the world, whether it's in sort of Eastern Europe or more widely because of the pandemic, let's hope the world can find a balance and a better landing point than it's reached at the moment, and we can go and do some of those amazing luxuries that we're privileged enough to be able to.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear. I mean, it's strange. I was gonna ask you if you were looking to book tickets for the near future, and you're already a step ahead and have done it. So that's good. So the next time we speak, we'll be asking you what's next on your bucket list then after Japan. But I think it's been awesome speaking to you today, Alan. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I know the network will take a lot from this as well, and I think the theme that I feel has ran through this is the great people that you have in your team and in the business there, the great culture, the great management style that goes through the business, and I think these days when companies are a lot more kind of on show when it comes to their recruitment and retention. If you go onto LinkedIn, people can see if it's a company where there's a revolving door of people, then it brings some red flags as to whether it's a company of choice. And with Fossil, you can see there's a very good retention in the business, and the things you've talked about today it largely must be the one of the reasons why that's the case. So it's great to hear the story behind it and your own journey as well. So I was just going to say, if any of the network wants to reach out to you directly, what's the easiest way they can do that?
LinkedIn always, Paul, and I welcome it. I've been very lucky to have an amazing career, and I'm happy to share wherever I can, and I try to whenever I can. So I try my very best. I won't say I don't fail sometimes, but I'll do my very best to always respond where I reasonably can.
Oh, perfect. Well, huge thanks again, Alan. Really enjoyed the discussion, and I hope you're able to get back on the snowboarding, and I hope are able to enjoy Japan. But I'm sure we'll speak before then.
Thanks, Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure, and look forward to doing it again sometime.
Thanks, Alan. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast episode. If you'd like to reach out to Paul or myself, please feel free to send a connection through on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to listen to previous episodes of the podcast, you can find them all at our website, www.emearecruitment.eu.